So this podcast started last December, and it was really, I was diagnosed in the fall of last year at the age of 45. It blew my mind, totally rocked my world. Everything just was overturned. Looking through my entire life through this new lens was mind blowing. And I really just wanted to kind of talk to other women about their diagnosis journeys and their diagnosis experiences in adulthood. And then I thought, well, how can I start, how can I interview women without just calling them up and seeming like this random creepy person? So I was like, I'll start a podcast. And then, it's sort of grown from there, where it's really it was really a sort of a selfish endeavor at the beginning, but now it's become sort of this advocacy project. So I'm curious about um, the genesis of ADHD Girls. But first, I want to hear your story in terms of like when you were 40, when you were diagnosed, correct?
Yeah, actually, this year I'm 40. I was diagnosed, well, I suppose after the whole pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And, because of the waiting times, it took a bit more time. But yeah, 40, married, having jumped several careers, and here I am. They
Uh,
combine ADHD.
yeah, same. I also call myself a pandemic diagnosis. So what exactly was happening in your life? What were some of the signs that made you kind of put two and two together and really start to seek out this diagnosis for yourself?
Well, to be honest, there's been so many times where, like my life just didn't work for me and I just didn't have the knowledge, right, about ADHD. But I think it was definitely the pandemic that caused so many women to come forward, diagnosed later in life. And I began to hear more and more media coverage. And it was actually a PR guru I followed who said, oh, she has ADHD, but it took her some time to come out and say that because she was worried how her clients would perceive her strength and it might affect her business. And so I was thinking, oh yeah, the back of my head is always, that's probably me, but not actually really believing that I have a condition. Just because, as you know, with ADHD, we've heard the most extremes of cases, right? We've heard of the people who have manic depression, manic depression and ADHD, and end up like committing suicide. So that's my exposure to it. So for me, like I never got to as close as that, wanting to end things. But there has been so many times where I just felt like I can't go on. But then the next day or the week after or the month after, I get up again and I can do it. But yeah, over the course of the pandemic, things were very tough in the family home. And I had a new baby who was 3 months when COVID struck.
Oh my
So
goodness.
so my husband had to go away. Well, he had a bereavement in the family, which was very tough for him. So he obviously needed a lot of support and understanding. But on my part, I was just like, I want to support you. And I did support him whilst he was away. I was keeping the house down, but I found it so hard. I was on constant flight or fight. And my baby, who I was breastfeeding at the time, was pooping nonstop. And I was thinking, what's going on? Are you getting the stress response? So he was clearly getting the stress response from me, which was so bizarre because as soon as my husband came back, he stopped doing that, explosive poop. Anyway, yeah, so that made me think, right, that isn't right. And also my husband in some ways might have resented me for not being more supportive, because whilst he's dealing with a bereavement, I'm telling him, can you please come back and help? It's just so simple, managing a household, right? Having two children, any other woman can do it, right? You look out, so many women like run the house whilst their husband are away on business trips. But for me, I couldn't even look after them for 10 days without, killing over. So that, yeah, sort of started the doubt in my head that maybe I'm not like other women. And so, yeah, with more and more discussions, it became clear that, yep, and you look back in your life and it just kind of, like matches and it makes sense. So that's when I actually went and seek a diagnosis.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. You brought back so many memories of having a 3-month old. and and just that guilt, right, of saying like, not only am I feeling anxious, but I'm passing it on to my child through my breast milk. So you've got that extra guilt of like, I'm already, affecting my child in this way that I can't control. I always feel like when I talk to women with young children, I want to give them a hug, because it
Yeah.
was like, I think, in general, I think we are wonderful mothers. I think ADHD has helped me in a lot of ways as a mother. My kids are older now; they're 14 and 10, and
Mm.
um, but I think back to those early years of just, just feeling so overwhelmed and not realizing that there was the sleep component and the noise component and all of that sensory issues, and really feeling like, yeah, like how I needed my husband's support so much. And I remember when my she was about not quite a year and a half. I think she was like 14 months. And his father died. And that was really a big struggle for us, because he was such a support. And he went into, a really, really deep grief. And I lost it too. And I felt terrible. Like you said, like, I was like, I want to be the support for you that you have been for me. And I can't do that because I'm really, really struggling. And I think that was the point where I finally went to the doctor and
Oh,
said I need
wow.
help. But it wasn't for ADHD. I didn't know at the time. That was, 14 years ago. But it was the first time I went on, I was diagnosed with postpartum depression.
Oh.
And I was diagnosed with both my kids with postpartum depression and anxiety. And now again with the diagnosis, realizing like, oh no, there was so much more going on there. Oh, that is such, excuse me, that was such a hard time.
Yeah, I think like there's so many parallels with our stories, and also we're not unique in this situation. There are so many more women who aren't able to juggle, but society makes them think that they should.
Mhm.
And it shouldn't be the way, like, do men have these worries? I think part of the reason for late diagnosis is socialization, what we are taught to be able to do as women or girls, to sit quietly at the corner and don't, like, hit your brother, that sort of thing, like
Mhm.
that will actually contribute to you thinking, okay, well, I should be a better person. And what's wrong with me? Am I not a good person?
Yeah, I remember my husband's aunt asking me how the baby was doing when my daughter was like a year old or so, and I looked at her and I was like, "It's really hard." and and she said, "I don't remember babies being hard." And I had that, that visceral moment of like, "Oh, I am clearly failing at this when other people aren't." And having that like secret shame of like, "Oh God, like not everybody finds this as hard as I do."
Mm.
Um, so now, was it like, I know a lot of people came to their diagnosis kind of from memes or TikTok videos, or how, again, where did you start to put those pieces together that this could be a neurodivergence?
Well, actually, like I said, it was when I saw the article that the PR guru that I
Oh,
follow
right.
laid out, and she had bullet points on her symptoms, and like it's just so funny, some of the things like, embarrassingly just going through multiple boyfriends at a time, it's like I have that. Yeah, was it a serial monogamist? I was
Mhm.
just going from one relationship to another, to another, to another, to another, and sometimes overlapping them. So yes, some things like that. And yes, just having difficulty at university. For finishing my PhD was a real struggle. So there were just so many times, and I remember feeling low level depression that lingered between each job transition and the jobs which I quit because I was either bored or just didn't want to do it anymore out of burnout. And it just didn't make sense to me, and I struggled to for a long time to put together all the great things I have inside my brain, on
Mhm.
paper, and persevere, through a job like most people do, climbing corporate ladders. So that's yeah, that's my story.
Yeah, that was a big one for me too. I think when I realized that spontaneous travel was a part of ADHD, and I was like, oh, I have a tendency to drop everything and just hop on a plane. At least I used to in my 20s, um, and um, and also, not being able to keep a job for longer than 2 years, I was like, oh yeah, that's definitely me. I think it was part boredom, but also sort of like I would get really bristly under authority, like I would have a manager that I felt was incompetent, or, I just always felt like I could do a better job.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
then I would have to
absolutely.
move on. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, so I mean, you did complete a PhD, which is an amazing. So, and I'm curious, looking back through your childhood at your, education, or, what do you look back at and think, holy crap, the signs were there all along?
Well, actually, it's sort of all started because very early on in life, I was a very quiet child. And I think you find a lot of girls with ADHD tend to be quite withdrawn.
Mhm.
I think it started for me, it started because I keep missing instructions. So the teachers would be saying, do this, and then I wouldn't hear it. And then I would ask my friends to interpret it back to me, even though we all spoke the same language. And then when I was 15, I remember I had like a lot of duties in school. I was a prefect, and then also I had like several co-curricular activities, clubs where I was holding post. And so like I was doing quite well academically to begin with because I had a real interest in science. But over time, when I had all these academic and extracurricular curricular activities sort of collide, my grades started slipping really badly, and I just lost interest in them because I was more interested in socializing and meeting boys, and just having fun because I was 15. And then I would fall asleep at the back of the class without knowing why. So I had a history book open right in front of me, and I'll just sleep behind it. And I thought that the teachers won't know because I was way at the back and it was a class of 40. And it looked really bad because I was a school prefect. And then I fell asleep at the back of the class. And I always look really tired. Then I think the reason for that is because I stay up really late the night before. And so if anyone had told me then that I had ADHD, you know, that would probably have changed my whole entire life. But no one did. No one knew about it. I was just known as probably inconsistent, and just my grades started slipping. So that went on until I was just too embarrassed to keep like nearly failing exams because I was hanging around with these smart kids. So in some ways that sort of helped me. That was my accountability. And then I started doing better because I wanted to prove to myself that I was good at something, and so I had a real interest in biology. I had a teacher who really believed in me, which helped so much, and before long I was known as a biology queen in my class. I wanted to cure cancer. I was totally obsessed with learning everything there is about cancer research. And apart from ADHD, I also have undiagnosed autism. And one of the traits of autistic people is they tend to collect, things of certain categories. And so for me, I was really geeky, and I remember just cutting newspaper articles about the latest medical breakthrough, whilst my friends are going out and having fun. So yeah, so I had the real interest in science, and I believed in myself enough and made other people believe in me. And also people were also so confused why I was so obsessed with cancer, so yeah, that was funny. But then I just saw it as almost a way out of my own brain. If I could actually get this qualification and live a new life, and I move to a new country, then like that just felt like a more adventurous life rather than what I had in living in KL. And so that's what happened. I managed to get a scholarship to come to England to do my master's and then my PhD, which I did struggle quite a lot because I think if you read about women with ADHD and girls with ADHD, the period of time when ADHD symptoms manifest more is transition. And I left my country to move like 12-hour time zone later to the UK with nobody that I know in the whole country. And I had to make new friends, find my own way and deal with cultural shock. So that was a recipe for a disaster, which actually did happen. I think those were my train wreck years. People tend to say oh, I thought everyone went crazy in their 20s anyway, but not really. Some people did actually knew what they were doing. And so for me, I had a train wreck a few years and had a lot of problems with relationships. And I was finding it very difficult to stay motivated doing my PhD once I got the scholarship. And because yeah, it's a long time to try and stay the course, and that was hard. um yeah, and I struggled right until the end. Even though I did really well in my PhD, I lost a lot of my confidence because basically also I think with ADHD there are things that you do that you don't know you're doing and you make mistakes, right? And with experiments and scientific experiments, you kind of need to have a very good system going. And if you make mistakes all the time and people are telling you you make the mistakes, then you start to lose confidence in yourself because you think maybe I just don't have the organization, to be a good scientist. And so that was really ironic because I did my PhD viva and both my examiners really liked me and they both offered me either a job or a reference. And then after that, I got a job offer to interview at Harvard Medical School. But at that point, I didn't believe in myself anymore. And the reason I told, the professor who I was emailing, and I said, well, my current supervisor doesn't really think I'm good enough, to do science. And he said to me, if I had believed everything that my teachers told me, then I wouldn't be where I am today. But even that wasn't enough to make me want to, continue doing science. And so from then on, yeah, there was a lot of exploration in terms of a career, a lot of
Mhm.
pivoting every few years.
Interesting. Yeah, I often wonder if I had had a diagnosis earlier in my life, how things would be different. And, because I talk about this with my husband too, with my children, right? He's concerned about getting them tested and diagnosed, and he always worries about the stigma, right? And the treatment. And I always say, like, if I had known how different my life would be, but I also wonder, like, how would I have limited myself? Because I think part of my experience with undiagnosed ADHD was that grit, that picking myself up at the 11th hour, picking myself up by the bootstraps and getting the thing done just to prove to myself that I could do it. And I feel like that's how I accomplished there were a lot of things that I was a train wreck at as well, but I sort of anything I accomplished, it felt like it took an enormous amount of that grit. And I appreciate that. So I often wonder, like, how, would a diagnosis have been limiting? I don't think at the end of the day that it would have been, but I don't know, would I have gone for things, or would I have just said it? No, I don't think that's, like motherhood. Like I talk about motherhood like it was so difficult because it really was. But I also feel like I don't want to say it was too hard. Like I don't want to discourage younger women with ADHD from being mothers because I think it's a wonderful, amazing, incredible experience. So
Yeah,
um,
absolutely. Yeah.
right.
Yeah, I completely agree with you actually. Just I hear so many women now who were diagnosed with ADHD and they fear becoming a mother. And like I feel a tremendous difference after starting my medication, which I just started last week. I'm hoping that I find a dosage that sticks. Like my mood is better and I'm more patient with my children.
Mhm.
And imagine like this is what other women, have, and then they have the patience, and because their brain allows them to be that way, right? And like you say, most of us with ADHD are really good mothers. We're very loving, very nurturing. In fact, from the outside we might look like we're made to be mothers, but it's the internal world. It's when things get overwhelming that you might lose your shit with your kids and you don't mean to do it, right? And like getting the right help that you need, might help facilitate what you need to do as a mother, and juggle, like I guess other women do.
Absolutely. I think since my diagnosis, I've become not only a better mother, but a better partner as well, because I sort of feel like, yeah, I can acknowledge my strengths, whereas I felt like I couldn't do that before. My default was always, oh, I'm such a terrible person because I've thrown into a rage and I don't know why. Whereas now I can kind of sit there and be like, okay, well, what's happening? Was there music and a television on in the background, and there were too many people talking, like I can kind of examine the environment and sort of figure out, okay, what were my triggers right now, and then work through that in like a more rational way, as opposed to kind of falling to the floor in the fetal position, which used to be my default.
Oh,
And so, like, well, not literally, but I just mean like, and same with my husband, right? I mean, I feel like I put so much value in what he brought to the relationship, and I never really thought about what I brought to the relationship. And I remember asking him for years, like, I know what I see in you, but I don't know what you see in me. And he would always give me these like really unsatisfactory answers, like, I don't know, you smell good, or like, or I'd be like,
jeez.
thanks. But then now I realize, like, we've been together for 20 years, and I realize like how annoying it must be to have the person who you love most in your life have such low self-regard, right? Like, it must be really frustrating to have heard that over and over and over again. And so now I'm like, oh, I see what I bring to the table now. I bring like the energy and the spontaneity and the idea, all of these things that I'm able to value now that I don't think I was,
Yeah.
because I never
Yeah.
took the time to recognize it.
Yeah. I do find that most people get into relationships with people who they think have something that they lack. So like you say, you bring the energy and the spontaneity. You might be with someone who, just kind of like to be like a home buddy, and, just don't want to just disturb the status quo. Whereas, you might be more like bold, and, you might be more outgoing, and you're able to ask for things when maybe he would prefer to shrink in the background. It's just my guess, but
Oh,
I'm
absolutely, right? Yeah. Yeah. If it wasn't for me, we would never get takeaway, because I'm the only one who calls people. He's like, that's my job, is to call the restaurant.
That's right.
So I'm curious, when you had your diagnosis, what was your family's response? Because you have a child who you're seeking a diagnosis to, right? So,
Oh, I had a child. I have two children, one who I have actually got a diagnosis for, and one who is only 2, but is
Mhm.
showing all signs of ADHD. And my husband is terrified. He's shaking his head. Well, yeah, that in itself, the acceptance of family members was a journey. So it, as you know, when you pursue a diagnosis, you would be, fully like obsessed about learning about everything there is about ADHD, right? And also how your brain works. So that's where I was. But my husband didn't really know anything about it, and he started reading things like, how this ADHD is, like in relationships. So he's trying to find the reason for my behavior. Say we've had an argument, is like, do people with ADHD end up staying in a marriage? No, not really. A lot of us end up getting divorced. so that those are the things that he would be Googling, but he won't be Googling, why is it that they act this way? What is causing this issue?
Mm.
But yeah, like, like most people only want to know what interests them. And so it took me a long time to make him see the good side about ADHD, and also what we can do to manage it. And he only really paid attention when he sees it in our daughter, because that's when he's actually actively involved, and that's when he has to be the patient one, and he doesn't have to just give in. So yeah, there was definitely a period where it was difficult, and I felt like not accepted. But that period passed, and now we're in a place where he's going around diagnosing people with ADHD. And he's like, that school mom, she definitely has ADHD. I'm like, okay. But yes, bearing in mind that school mom looks really nice and gentle and really, good person. So I'm glad that there's a turnaround as well in terms of how he notices that anyone can have it. There's 5 to 10% of the world's population has ADHD, and even more if you count the people who are undiagnosed. So
I know, I
that's
think
all
it's got to be
common.
more.
Mhm.
And what about your family back home?
Back home, mental health is still quite a stigma, and no one really knows about neurodiversity. So as you can imagine, like growing up in an Asian country, we don't really talk about our brain. We don't really talk about our struggles, because if you have to struggle, just suck it up and, get over it, right? Because your family is more important than you. So, and yeah, unfortunately, I grew up with a with quite a turbulent household. I was one of 5 children and the oldest girl in the family. And in an Asian family, the eldest girl has to do all the chores and do all the work. And I remember at the age of 11 and 12, I was asked to do cooking for the whole family. And through ADHD style, I accidentally poisoned everyone because I didn't wait for the cooking to be done thoroughly. So the chicken was undercooked and everyone got food poisoning. But that will teach my parents. It's a long time now. Everyone's still alive, but yeah, there was a lot of trouble with the childhood. And my family actually accepted my diagnosis, but not actually talk about it, because we don't actually see each other after COVID. No one's traveled, but my mom has realized she has got some ADHD traits, and she definitely pointed to my dad, because of his own serial business starting, and he was a serial entrepreneur himself. So it's definitely there. But yeah, they're both almost 70, and my dad's 72, and so to them there's no point getting any labels or diagnosis. So
Yeah, my father's 80 and I haven't seen him since the beginning of the pandemic either, and haven't really talked about ADHD with him. I'm sure I know I got it from him, but it's just a conversation. I think it's difficult to want to even go there sometimes because of the misconceptions. And I'm like, I don't have the time or the energy to sit you down and go over. I think as a parent, he would be much more defensive. Like, you didn't struggle. What are you talking about? Your life was fine. And I think I had that same kind of feeling with my 2 older brothers, who were very academic, Ivy League schools, very success. Both are very successful, and I, sort of always felt like they thought of me as the like misfit younger sister who was always chasing dreams and doing this and never amounting to anything. And so there was this part of me that kind of is reluctant to talk about it with them, because I feel like there is that inherent judgment of like, oh, you're just finding an excuse, right? This is just your excuse for why you are lazy, or why you're scatterbrained, or why you can't do the thing. And I see so much of my own internalized stigma in terms of that, that fear of using ADHD as an excuse, as opposed to it being this like miraculous explanation. And I always complain on my podcast when I do talk about being diagnosed, and somebody's reaction is like, oh, I'm so sorry, as though it's like this terrible disease I have that I was diagnosed with. But I'm like, no, this is revelatory. Like, you don't understand how amazing this has been. But yeah. So how old is your oldest daughter?
She's 7
Okay,
now.
all
She was
right. So
6 when she.
that's an early diagnosis. That must be
Yeah.
incredibly helpful to have to sort of be advocating at this age and kind of see the writing on the wall already.
Yeah, yeah, it is absolutely, Katie. And I think you would agree, because you have children in education too, right? And do they have ADHD?
I think they both do, yeah.
Okay, but yeah, so you would know that being in the education, the school system is very challenging for people with ADHD. And my daughter was struggling for a long time, even before I knew it. And her struggle was around anxiety and being told off, because it would sort of ignite the rejection sensitivity dysphoria that even young children seems to get. Yeah, so her problem was actually making her not want to go to school, and she wants to stay home with us because she loves us best. And so yeah, I had to get help, because the teachers were saying, we're calling her out. Imagine being singled out in a class of 30 and just told like, can you please be quiet, and not in a nice way. And that definitely contributed to her self-esteem. And since I knew she had ADHD, I started advocating for her before her diagnosis, but no one took me seriously. I kept going and going and kept sending emails after emails. And it wasn't until she had a full-blown meltdown that they were actually listening to me. And yeah, because I was writing so many things, these are the things that you should look out for, but no one was really listening. So eventually, when she got her diagnosis, they are listening, but it doesn't mean that they're doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
The only free pass, sort of like an easy pass that my daughter gets now, is she doesn't get told off in front of the class, because I said that, any sort of punishment would compound any anxiety and self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know the severity of it, because, the more like children get embarrassed and told off in public, the more it impacts their self-esteem. And it's like a spiral, like it goes into the spiral, like people hate me, I'm not good enough. And yeah, so we're trying to protect that right now. And she's still young, so we didn't want to start her on medication yet, but we are wondering what the next step is, because it is at this age where she's getting more and more emotional dysregulation.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel really sorry for her in that place, but at the same time I'm triggered, as you can imagine. Like, even though you understand ADHD doesn't make you, like, any easier to deal with someone who has it. And so yeah,
Absolutely.
there's a lot of, yeah, there's constant management in on our side.
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
really seeing how the public school system is failing these children and feeling so helpless
Right.
a lot of the time. Yeah, it can be, you said it perfectly, it can be frustrating just advocating, on a full-time
Mhm.
basis for these children. And I think about,
Mhm.
but at the same time, yeah, thinking about my own childhood, like what, when I've talked about this on my podcast before, where like I was left-handed, and
Mhm.
my
Me
kindergarten
too.
teacher forced me to become right-handed. I don't know
Oh
if that
dear.
happened. And and I also look back and I was like, why did my parents allow that to happen? Like, it was in like the late 70s, early 80s, so it wasn't like that draconian. Why did I have a teacher who did this, and why did my parents always laugh about this? Because it must have been so jarring to a child to have to switch to this right hand. And then not only was I switched to right-handed, but then the teachers would complain about my poor handwriting and how, and right. And I think about like how demoralizing this experience is for young children, right? Like I was told at a very young age, I went back and looked at my report cards after my diagnosis, and it was so emotional, because I think like when I was really young, I was told that I was enthusiastic and a leader and all of these things, but her handwriting is terrible and she needs to work on that, and she's too just easily distracted when she's in a group, and she talks too much, and it just like all of this, nitpicking, that just like you could see over the years, it would just build up and build up. And I would get separated from the group of, we'd be in these like pods of desks, and my desk would always get separated, and I'd have to sit by myself. And I think about all of these like microaggressions throughout the years that just really are so, demoralizing, in terms of like our strengths
Mhm.
are thought of as weaknesses and thought of as faults in so many aspects of public education.
Mhm.
And then to watch me in middle school just kind of give up, and I had that same experience that a lot of people did, which was if there was a topic I was really interested in, I got an A+. If there was anything else, it was usually a D. And I graduated by the skin of my teeth. It's very emotional to think back. And also, like you said, like how much of it is the executive dysfunction, how much of it is executive dysfunction that can be treated with medication, and how much of it is just the emotional ramifications of the way we are treated and the way we are misunderstood. And then what do you do with all of that? And how avoidable is that? Is it not? I mean, part of me feels like in my own life, I experience it to such a degree, as well as it being internalized. But then as a mother, to turn toward your child and be like, I want to protect you from all of this, and I'm not able to. And yeah, it is very emotional.
Yeah, yeah, and that's why, I think that we should always look at the strengths, of your children and start to nurture it really young. Because I recently spoke to a therapist who specialized in helping child and teens with ADHD, and she said that, with every child, you just need to look at the internal world of them and really find out individually what makes them tick, because each person is different, right? And really just find out what they love doing. And as ADHDers, we are motivated by the interest-based nervous system. We tend to want to do things that are interesting, challenging, novel, urgent, and that we're passionate about. So if we can look at the internal world, of what the child is really good at and just harness that, and their future is potentially limitless. But the problem with the school system, especially the public school system right now, is they don't have time for that. In order to get that kind of help, you almost need to go to a specialist school, and a specialist school that actually, give you all the help you need in order to do what you need. Like I've spoken to so many really successful young girls who, they said that, what helped them is actually being in a system that actually appreciates their neurodivergence and helps support and not make it into a like a weakness, not make it into a crutch, like actually just nurture that, and so like with that, then they can grow, because we're in school now, children are learning everything, but as we get older, we don't actually need to know everything. We don't work in tended industries, although in my part I have but we don't actually need to specialize in so many wide industries. So if we start very early on, as ADHD has more than one interest, if we can just focus on those interests, and then their future can be bright. And and I know children who are medicated from a young age, some of them don't actually like being medicated, but then for those who have the right treatment and the right support, then then these children will grow up to be quite successful adults and be able to manage their internal lives as well. But it's like an all-round holistic approach. It's not just from one side, is it?
Absolutely. Yeah. I've gone on many a rant about the emphasis on consistency with children and how, this idea of like, well, you do so well in XYZ, but why can't you, why are you doing so poorly in geography? Let's focus on that. You're like, it's because it's boring. I don't know. Like, like, why do we always have to focus on the one thing that we're not doing well?
Yeah, because people want you to be an all-rounder, don't they? They always want to
Right?
fix
Why?
you. No need to fix. Good as I am.
Exactly, right? Okay, so then what prompted ADHD Girls and you're sort of transitioning to the mentoring and consultation work? I mean, obviously from our conversation, I know the answer, but I want to hear from you. Like,
Yeah, well,
how did you get started in shifting there?
yeah, actually, I'm also still going with the mentoring and consultation. And actually, the mentoring consultation I began with was around communicating people's value. So people with ADHD tend to find it difficult to find their real advantage, their value, because we do so many things and we're good at quite a lot of things, but we don't actually stop to think, what is it that I can do, in this day and age, as a career, right? And my background as communications came in handy for that, because I could think of a million ways for you to bring your talent out into the world and get you noticed. So that's what my program was about. And ADHD Girls was born really because I realized that I wasn't just doing this part-time, wasn't doing this some of the time, I was doing this full-time, right? And yeah, it was full-time, so I might as well, make it into an organization. So it took me a long time to get there because I analysis paralysis, but eventually when I did, I realized I wanted to do it in a not for profit model. So how I work now is I want to work with the corporates, academia, and other nonprofits, other organizations, to empower girls and women with ADHD through advocacy, education, and specialist insights. And the model of support is that the funds we generate from working with these partners will go back into supporting, the videos we make to interview ADHD specialists, and also hopefully to create some workshops in the future, that are free or subsidized. So that's my thinking for now.
That's amazing. I know it. It's like it's so wonderful to watch the trajectory of these full-time hobbies that become businesses.
That's
And
right.
But I think, there is so much more information that needs to be out there for women and girls, especially as they like it boggles my mind because I have been so immersed in ADHD since my diagnosis. I sort of forget. It seems to me like, oh, everybody's finding out about this. This is so wonderful. There's been this proliferation of diagnoses. And then I'll put something out there on like TikTok and somebody will say, I had no idea, or these, there's I see them starting to really kind of put the pieces together in their own life for the first time, and it's just, I feel like those are those moments that are so rewarding where I think like if I could save one person, what if I could save one woman from feeling like she's just depressed or just a bad mom or all of these things
Mhm.
that I kind of placed on myself before this incredible revelatory diagnosis, that it will have all been worth it. That there are still so many women out there, I think, who have no idea
Mhm.
that that this can all be kind of wrapped up in a neat explanation of their neurodivergence, and then you can completely shift your narrative, right? You shift how you think of yourself and how you present yourself. Like it's just I feel like a phoenix a lot of the time, where it's just it took an emotional meltdown. It took the pandemic to really kind of have all the cards thrown up in the air, and now it's just been, I think, can be so empowering to kind of think of yourself in that term. um
Yeah.
right
Yeah,
now.
Katie, I mean, like, what you said about, wanting to advocate for, ADHD in women and, wanting to do something to help people, like that's something most ADHDers have in common. Like we're all like driven to do something like with like this social justice in mind. And we want to be a part of the change because mainly because we receive so much trouble, since a young age. We want to help people not get into the same place that we were at. And we're kind, we know the yeah the trials and tribulations that people go through.
Absolutely, right. And so much self-doubt and
Mm,
confusion, right? Feeling like I know I'm bright, but, or I'm no,
yeah.
like I think we had, yeah, we that sense that if only I had known as a child how my life would be different. There is so much of that underlying grief and questioning, and
Exactly.
but like I
Yeah.
said, I'm so grateful for the grit, because I think that is something that is also very, a large part of our stories too, which is that sense of like, okay, now I have these answers. What do I do? How do I move forward? I love that idea of like,
Mm,
while I often kind of rant against this idea that ADHD is a superpower because not everybody's
mm,
there, and I feel like that can be kind of toxically positive in
mm,
some
yeah.
ways, I do feel like there is this. I really appreciate the strength-based approach to like, okay, what, like I'm actually a wonderful, incredible human, and what can I do now, and how can I live my life from a place of
Yeah.
empowerment.
Well, exactly. Yeah, I posted something today on Instagram about being twice exceptional, right? Because you might be familiar with this term,
Mhm.
where you are exceptional in the way that you're great. You have this amazing human capital, but you also have some disability that is stopping you from fulfilling your potential. And like you say, the self-doubt and the pernicious imposter syndrome, perfectionism, that most of us go through, it actually stops us from fulfilling potential. And so we need to reach out to people who can help us, who can actually be a mirror of the good stuff in ourselves, because we all too often tell ourselves the bad things, right?
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah, it was always a joke in my household that I had the highest IQ of any of my siblings because I had gotten into the gifted program. And so I was in the gifted program, and yeah, I kept waiting for them to kick me out because I was always such a problem, quote unquote. And I was terrified, because I never understood why I was in this program, because all I was ever told was that I wasn't working hard enough. I kept waiting to get thrown out and never was. And always sort of had this feeling like, okay, well, what is this? And my mother would be like, you're such a mystery. I don't understand it. You had this high IQ. And I've been terrified to take an IQ test my entire life after that, because I felt like that was the one thing I had going for me was this IQ test I took as a child. And so I would like refuse to take one now as an adult because I'm worried that that was a lie as well. Um, so one thing I love to ask all of my guests is if you could call ADHD something else, what would you call it? Because I feel like it's so misleading
Right.
and pathologized and problematic.
Yeah.
And I have no answers because I have no idea what I would call it, but I always love to see to see what somebody else might come up with.
Yeah, it's interesting because I looked at that and I thought of a lot of things, but actually I don't know if you have this issue, Katie, but especially if you're really intelligent and you have high IQ. But I come across the words of Alan Littman and Kathleen Nadeau, Patricia Quinn in the book Understanding Girls with ADHD. It's that women who have high intelligence tend to have more emotional dysregulation. So for me, if I were to rename ADHD, I would be like, come back in 15 minutes, or give me a break syndrome, because if I have an emotional outburst, it would normally just last that time, and that's because of my amygdala hijack, my emotional flooding, where I won't be able to explain to you why I am the way I am. But if you come back in 15 minutes, I'll be a completely different person. Right?
Absolutely. Right. It's funny because my daughter and I are both like that. We kind of crash into each other in these rates. She's 14, so she's, in high school. We're both full of hormones right now. And so we crash into each other with this like intense rage, but we also know that if we kind of go back to our corners of the ring, we will both sort of settle down and that'll be fine and we can move on. And it drives my husband crazy because he's all about like resolution and working it out, and and he feels like it's irresponsible to just kind of like shout at somebody and then not deal with it, or to not take offense to it or anything. And I'm like, we get it, we understand, it's our love language.
Yeah, and so important to give us space as well when we're there, otherwise you just get the worst of us, right?
Yeah.
So like space is important.
I keep coming back to the pendulum analogy too, because I felt like my life was so much of a pendulum. I thought before my diagnosis, I had bipolar because I just, would have that manic energy and that manic interest in things. And then it would swing to the other end of that lethargy and feeling feeling depressed and paralyzed. And so that, like, I just always come back to that swinging of the pendulum, that dysregulation. And now I'm picturing Miley Cyrus on a wrecking ball. I don't know. Right? It's such an emotional roller coaster.
That's right.
So how can people find you and work with you? Do you work internationally with clients?
Yeah, I do actually. I provide consultations and mentoring for ADHD. They can find me in all the places that you look on social media because I am on everyone. Although I think I'm probably more consistent on LinkedIn and Instagram at the moment. So I work with individuals with ADHD, with mentoring and consultation, because recently I've helped people who want to design apps for women with ADHD. I'm help a master's student who want to create the outline of the skeletal structure of her research. And also I help women who are seeking diagnosis for their children, and various other people. There is a certain pro bono element in what I do, but also like to support like ADHD girls. I actually do need to charge for my time as well. So I have half an hour and 60 minutes consultation. And then for corporates and academia, I'm actually very actively seeking partners right now via my LinkedIn Live series, ADHD in the Workplace. So if you have a spare minute, you can log in and support. And if you have, if you're part of an organization, who wants to make your systems more ADHD friendly, do get in touch as well, because I team up with a group of ADHD professionals, coaches, mentors, occupational psychologists, and ADHD workplace design specialists in order to create a more neuro-inclusive workplace and study environment.
That's amazing. I just realized I didn't get to ask you about the autism journey as well, because I sort of feel like when we talk about ADHD and that diagnosis, I think, one thing I came to my neurodivergence through an ADHD diagnosis, but I do sort of view this large spectrum of
Mhm.
neurodivergency and kind of this neurotype that we have. And
Mhm.
so it is fascinating to me to see all of that overlap. I'll have to have you back for another, another interview. Um,
Yeah, I mean that's really interesting because I don't know if you have any co-occurring condition. You can do you have any other?
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like the more I fall down these rabbit holes where I'm like, yeah, I really need to look into this.
Yeah, I mean, I've been told by my ADHD coach that once you get medicated for your ADHD, the other things become more obvious. So for me, the tidying and going around the house looking whether things are in order has become so much more pronounced.
Well, I remember telling somebody the story about how I used to have all of my books alphabetized by author in my bookshelf, and I would move, and I loved moving because it was an opportunity to reorganize things, you know. And so I would have like, it was an opportunity when I would take things out of the boxes to, I would have like my OCD would be in full effect, right? I would have everything color coordinated, and I loved it. And then when I moved in with my husband, now husband, he took all of our books and just shoved them into the shelf, and he didn't care if they were upright or, you know, which direction they were facing, and they were in no order whatsoever. And I just was like horrified. And then I thought, well, now I can never organize ever again, you know. Like I was like, that's your domain, I will never look at that ever again. Like I it's all or, and that all or nothing. It's very, yeah, it's very fascinating to kind of look at some of those overlaps.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, you know, I think one thing you didn't mention was your YouTube videos, because that's kind of how I
Oh
came
yeah.
to you. And I want to make sure I will put a link to
Oh,
your,
thank
I'll put a
you.
link to your LinkedIn or your website, because I think that kind of sends you in all sorts of directions. Or not
Yeah.
LinkedIn, Linktree. But you're, I love, you know, you're having some incredible conversations with Sari Solden and Ned Hallowell and some of the really
Mm,
like pioneers
mm.
in this field. So I really just so appreciate the conversations you're having and the advocacy you're doing. And
Yeah, it's amazing actually, even for me to actually have this one-on-one with them because after these interviews, I have this, like personal time to chat to them. It's amazing. I'm getting this all for free.
I
And
know, right?
it's really cool. Yeah, it's really cool. And yeah, I don't talk about my YouTube video enough because I see more and more people that I approach for sponsorship sees me as an influencer, but
Mm,
I don't really work on that capacity. My background is in communications, and I talk to doctors and scientists about the great work that they do. So that's where I want to come from. As someone who is disseminating very important messages and helping other people at the same time. So that's
mhm.
where I'm at. So
Yeah,
ADHD Girls, yes. So ADHD Girls YouTube channel. It's on my linked in bio actually. So if
yeah.
you follow ADHD_girls on Instagram, you'll find it.
It's great. And I think, you know, for me, I realize now in retrospect when the why I started the podcast was because so much of our learning about ADHD comes through hearing about lived experiences in
Yeah.
other women, right? And seeing ourselves in those stories. It's not from reading the DSM. It's not from, you know, reading, you know, long boring reports
Mhm.
on all of the various symptoms. And
Mhm.
it's really about knowing that we're not alone, and knowing that we're not crazy, and knowing
Mm,
that there is a name to this, you know. And so by having these conversations, I feel like I'm getting my PhD in ADHD because
yeah.
I'm learning so much from
Yeah.
everybody else about what this looks like. And it's so funny to me because I'm like, you know, my academic career was so abysmal, but here I'm realizing this is how I learn. And
Yeah.
so
I think, yeah, you're completely right. I think you're learning by doing, and because it's fun, right? Like it's much more fun to go out there and talk to people than to open a book, a
right,
textbook, and read
right,
about it, right? And I
and then
completely
reread
agree.
the same paragraph over and over and over again.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Um,
That's right. That's
awesome.
really cool. Yes. Thanks for having me, Katie. It's so
Yes,
nice talking to you.
thank you so much. I was so pleased to have this conversation and get to know you a little bit better. So thank you for everything that you were doing and being such an ADHD badass out there in the UK. And
Thank you. Yeah, and also, Katie, I wanted to say to you, I was listening to Sari Soden, and do you know she was only diagnosed at the age of 40?
I do. I mean, I read her book was the first one I read, and I'm very excited. I'm interviewing her after, I think it's the
Amazing.
at the end of October, beginning of November, I've got her lined up because I'm like reaching
That's
out to some of
amazing.
the bigger names now that my
Exactly.
podcast has kind of gotten off the ground. And yeah, so I'm very excited. She's
Yeah.
like,
So it's
I'm going to be
amazing.
very starstruck with her. And it was funny because when I watched your interview with her, you had that same, like, I can't believe this is
I
happening.
know. I know. Yeah. Yeah, but exactly. Yeah. So my point was she was only diagnosed at the age of 40, and she said before that she didn't have a voice. And after her diagnosis, she found her voice, and yeah, look where she is now.
I
Right. So that
know.
is possible for any of us who are diagnosed later in life, so to find our groove again.
I love that.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what we should call ADHDs. Yeah, find your groove.
Yeah. Especially the late diagnosis club. Right.
Right?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
Okay. Well, again, have a wonderful evening, and yeah, we'll hopefully stay in touch on the internet or
Sure.
whatever you're doing. I'd love to support it. So
All right. Thank you so much, Katie. And I hope to speak to you again.
awesome. All right. Take
Okay.
care. Bye.
Bye.